Fire Emblem is a huge game series and probably the most popular Nintendo franchise that hasn't yet reached the mainstream, the likes of Mario, Zelda, and Kirby. Fire Emblem is a tactical role-playing series where you control your units and simulate battles, and the series has sold around 13 million copies in total for 16 games since the first one released in 1990. It's just getting to the point where it's catching on to the Western audiences, especially with Fire Emblem Three Houses just releasing on July 25th. So with Fire Emblem being larger than it's ever been, I wanted to introduce newcomers to the franchise, give my thoughts on each game in the series. That's right, me, someone whose only experience with Fire Emblem was playing some of the characters in Smash a few times. I've never played a Fire Emblem game, and who better to introduce people to video game franchises than someone who's equally as clueless, right? Well, I've done a bunch of research, and as of writing the script, I have 2 weeks until Three Houses comes out to play every single game and finish this video for newcomers to the series. How hard can that be? There's only a few games totaling in at around 500 hours of gameplay. Okay, maybe it's kind of impossible to ask, so here's the deal. I'm not really going to play all of them. First of all, I'll just play the remakes instead of the originals to make it easier on myself and so I don't have to play essentially the same game twice. That means I'd have to go through in order of the original game's release date: Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, Fire Emblem Echo Shadow Valentia, Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem, Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War, Fire Emblem Thracia 776, Fire Emblem The Binding Blade, Fire Emblem, this one is just called Fire Emblem, Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones, Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn, Fire Emblem Awakening, Fire Emblem Fate, which is actually 3 separate games: Birthright, Conquest, and Revelation. There's also some other Fire Emblem spin-off things. I'll just save those for another time considering how much I already have on my plate. I'll also not be playing each game in its entirety. I'm essentially just going to play a game until I get bored or have to stop for time, but I'll attempt to shoot for a few hours with each one so I can get a good idea of what it's like. I'll really be putting my brain into the headspace of a casual gamer here, guys. This is a real commitment. Each review will essentially act as my first impressions of the game and also be spoiler-free because, well, I won't even know any of the spoilers anyway, probably. With quick and easy to understand rundowns of every game, it'll also be simpler for people that have maybe never even heard of Fire Emblem until watching this video. But it should also be fun for veterans of the franchise to make fun of some person on the internet for being a dumbass. So, with all that being said, let's get into a review / retrospective of all the Fire Emblem games from someone that doesn't know Fire Emblem and also its remakes instead of the originals. And I don't 100% finish all of them because I don't really have time for that since I'm making this entire video in a really short span of time in order to get the attention of people buying the new Fire Emblem game that's coming out on Nintendo Switch. Maybe you want to watch a video that will help them understand the series because the only experience they have with Fire Emblem is like the 10 anime sword boys in Smash Bros. I'll need to work on that title for the actual video.
I never felt like down. I never felt like down.
Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, the Blade of Light is the one with Marth in it, and the remake is titled Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, that's the one we're playing. The original game was released on the Famicom in 1990, with a remake for the DS coming out in 2008. My first thoughts on the first Fire Emblem were, wow, this is pretty good, especially considering how old it is. Then I got past the first hour and realized how boring the game actually is. It actually just felt super dated, despite me even playing a remake that came out like 20 years later. The plot is pretty standard. You're a prince and you have to round up a group of other flat characters and get revenge on someone by doing these things, like these fantasy story things. It's pretty standard. The game being underwritten isn't really surprising, but I can't in good faith just ignore this huge aspect just because it came out a super long time ago. Obviously, since I'm playing the remake version, there's aspects that are different than the original, but it's pretty much the same all in all, so I've heard. On the bright side though, the gameplay is pretty fun if you like the style, even if future games do it better. And the future games also streamline some things more. Also games before they streamline things more. I don't know why this one didn't have aspects that older games had that made things easier. Anyway, the gameplay in this one is pretty challenging, but I'd say it's about medium difficulty for a Fire Emblem game. If you don't know the Fire Emblem games, the series consists of battles that are turn-based tactical sim-like things with units such as sword fighters, clerics, mages, and more. Later games introduce more aspects like tweaks in the combat and some dating sim stuff.
My heart is beating so fast. I'm yours forever.
But considering how simple this game is, it could be a good start if you want to pick up from the very beginning. But with most of the Fire Emblem games not being connected story-wise, it doesn't really matter, and other games are just as easy to get into, if not more. The Fire Emblem games also incorporate a permadeath feature, so when one of your units die in battle, they stay dead permanently, making every move in the game life or death. However, this is a game where that mattered the least to me, because due to the characters being so dull, I kind of just stopped caring when they died and not even putting in the effort to restart from a save, something I did constantly in the later titles. Overall, I'd have to give Shadow Dragon 1.5 Pantsets Marlis out of 5. I'm sure it was good at its time, but there's better options out there, and this remake doesn't really do anything to make the game special, you know?
Once upon a time, there was a god named Duma and a goddess named Milla who fought each other bitterly for an age.
Hey, why did Milla and Duma have to fight so much? Couldn't they just say they were sorry?
Let's promise we'll never end up like that, okay?
Yeah, nothing will ever come between us.
Gods, no. Don't leave me, Celica. You can't! Celica! Celica! Say something, please! Celica!
Fire Emblem Echo's Shadow of Valentia hooked me straight off the bat with its emotional opening cinematic. This is a remake of the second game in the series, but in this case, the creators put their heart into making something that respected the original while still being a new and improved product. Something interesting I discovered about this game is that the director, Kenta Nakanishi, was actually hired on the spot when he recalled the story of playing the first two Fire Emblem games with his father, including the original version of this game, then titled Fire Emblem Gaiden. His father passed away shortly before the third Fire Emblem would be released, and Nakanishi would bury his father with a copy of the third game they were never able to experience together. When looking through his father's personal belongings some years later, he rediscovered Fire Emblem Gaiden and fell back in love with it. This is the type of person that is important in the development of a remake, and the passion and soul that went into making this game really shows. Shadows of Valentia contains probably the best story of any Fire Emblem game, which is heightened even more by the voice talent behind it.
You mean we get paid? As in actual money? We're in the money. We're in the money.
Oh, am I mistaken? I thought I heard something about delicious pancakes.
The writing in this entry is also a huge step up from the previous entry I had played as well. The gameplay is mostly the same though, but everything about the characters and story more than make up for it. Putting this game down so I had time to move on killed me because I really wanted to keep playing the game and find out what happens between the titular leads of Alm and Cecilia. The inclusion of these two characters also makes this feel less linear than some of the other games due to switching between them. It also gives more emotional dynamic to everything. Unfortunately, the maps for battles are a little lacking and most of them being uninteresting and samey. One thing that's unique with Echoes are dungeons. When in a dungeon, the game enters a third-person mode where you can explore and interact with your surroundings. I found them similar to dungeons in Persona, where you can attack enemies, which initiates combat, something the Shin Megami Tensei and Fire Emblem crossover Tokyo Massage Sessions fucking hashtag sharp thing FE also does. Although, it's not really the same as Persona. I think Persona, and even the fucking hashtag one, have better dungeon designs. This one, the dungeons feel mostly like an afterthought. They were also in the original Gaiden game, but in this one they just feel kind of unnecessary. It's a nice change of pace though. One thing I wish the dungeons had more of especially were puzzles to really make use of the 3D traversal. I really recommend this one as a starting point due to the great story and characters and the combat being pretty easy to understand. But it's important to note that combat features a terrain cover system instead of the weapon wheel that most other Fire Emblem games use. I give this one 4 out of 5 excuses to talk about Persona. Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem Heroes of Light and Shadow is a remake of Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem, which was a sequel to Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and Blade of Light, which is one with Marth in it. This one also has Marth in it because, well, it's a sequel, but this time your OC can hang out with him. Mystery and New Mystery of the Emblem were both never released outside Japan, with this one being the only remake game not released outside Japan due to bad sales. But luckily the internet exists and I was able to find a translated version. I expected not to like Mystery of the Emblem due to it being a sequel of the pretty bland first game, but Mystery of the Emblem was actually sort of more okay than Shadow Dragon, luckily. A lot about Mystery of the Emblem is still pretty average in terms of Fire Emblem games, but the writing and characters were definitely more interesting than Shadow Dragon to the point where I didn't get bored of it after like an hour. This is another one I'd be interested in continuing because I want to know what happens in the story, but overall it'd be around 2.5 bad hair days out of 5. This is kind of pretty middle road for Fire Emblem games. It's about right in the middle of everything. Due to the remakes of the first 3 games, the actual oldest game we'll be playing is Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War, which is also never released outside Japan. This entry is on the SNES and is supposedly the main inspiration for Fire Emblem 3 Houses, which really piqued my interest despite its age. The plot of the game follows a bunch of people I'll never remember the names of, spanning a vast story that's also super confusing and I couldn't remember past the opening sequence. Like seriously, this game opens with the equivalent of a paragraph long summary of every Game of Thrones book combined. One of the most noticeable aspects of Genealogy of the Holy War is how expansive the map sizes are. The maps make each battle feel like an actual war taking place, fitting the tone of the game perfectly. Holy War is an expansive game, honestly too expansive even. The big maps just make battles more confusing and take a super long time as opposed to the condensed battles of every other game. How this one works is that there's one big map and the story evolves while you're trying to capture the castles and defend your own around the map. While in other games each map kinda acted as their own chapter, Holy War basically has multiple chapters in one. It's a really strange one, so I wouldn't recommend it if you're first starting out, unless that game aspect seems super interesting to you. What makes it worse though is that there's no tutorial in the game, so you're essentially going in blind, which, sure, the original game came with a huge manual, and sure, I could just look up how to play the game correctly, but coming from someone that doesn't have any patience, I'd much rather play one of the other Fire Emblem games. Especially considering the length I had to go through just to get this game running by installing an emulator, this one probably isn't for casual fans. Sorry if this is your favorite Fire Emblem, which it actually is for a lot of people, but it's just not for me and I could barely even get 30 minutes into it. The scope of the story is still interesting to me though, and I did a little digging to see if it actually ended up being interesting, and what I found was a lot of incest. So Genealogy of the Holy War takes inspiration from historical political drama as opposed to fantasy tropes, and has a whole theme of not repeating history. Basically, people are dumb and repeat their mistakes. The game is also the first Fire Emblem game that had fucking, something the other games would reuse for dating sim and fan service aspects the newer games are kind of known for, but we'll get back to that later on down the line. Holy War incorporated this sex mechanic by having the characters pair up and make babies that grew up to be their own playable characters, making the game really feel like an epic story spanning generations. As far as I can tell, the story gets really engrossing, especially near the end, so it's unfortunate that I can't get myself enough motivation to even get to the first chapter. I'm sure this game would be great if they remade it like they did Echoes and really streamlined it, but How it is in this state, and from what I played, I'll just have to give it a 1.5 meme I don't understand because I didn't get far enough into the game out of 5. Props to you if you like this one, and I respect it as being daring and have its time, but Fire Emblem Forest is not for me, I guess. It also has a super slow start that I just couldn't get into it, I'm sorry. From what I heard, Fire Emblem Thracia 776 is the hardest of the series, but honestly, it's pretty easy to get into after playing a few of the others. At least that's what I thought playing the first battle, and then I lost the second battle, then I lost the second battle again, and then again, and eventually I gave up and just watched some playthroughs of it to get an idea of what the game is like. The writing is pretty dull in this one as well, which was possibly due to this one also being a fan translation. Though as far as I can tell, the translators did a pretty good job, so who knows. The main character is Leaf, and while I don't really care about him, I really like the name Leaf. The story of Thracia 776 is the same as like every other Fire Emblem game, with some royal kid being on the run and having to get revenge and get back onto the throne or something. The entire game also takes place between just 2 chapters of Genealogy: The Holy War, which is just a testament to how huge that game was. Seriously, unless you're a Fire Emblem elitist, this game doesn't really matter, and it really doesn't do anything to set itself apart from the other games besides its intense difficulty. At this point, all the Fire Emblem purists that like to gatekeep the franchise by saying only the old games are good have already disliked the videos, so I'll just give this game 1 leaf out of 5 and move on. This is definitely not a Fire Emblem game to start on, by the way. Fire Emblem The Binding Blade is the one with Roy in it and came out on the Game Boy Advance in 2002. This is the 6th game in the series to be released if you're not keeping up, but also the 6th game to still be a Japan exclusive if you don't count the first 2 games remakes that came out many years later being released worldwide. Due to this game only officially being Japanese, it is also often called the Sealing Sword, Sealed Sword, the Sword of Seals, or some variation of the name, but we'll keep calling it the Binding Blade because that's what Wikipedia calls it. Binding Blade is the first entry on a handheld console, which did wonders for the franchise. Maps were now more condensed due to the screen size, so they ended up being simpler in all the right ways, and the format for combat really works for on-the-go gameplay. Game Boy Advance also makes for the graphics looking way better when you compare it to the originals, and the games no longer have a look of being old, which makes it more appealing to the eyes. Of course, to play the game, you probably need to use an emulator unless you speak Japanese. In fact, a lot of these games could be hard for newcomers to play considering you either need an old console or a computer good enough to run an emulator, but ignoring those aspects, this game could be another suitable starting point. After the impossible nightmare that was Thracia 776, I thought this entry would be easier, and it was, but it was still pretty challenging. The maps, while designed well, take a while to finish and are kind of drawn out, which adds more to the challenge due to your units being pretty weak and in constant need of healing. The story has some elements that are pretty good with a few sparks of good writing, but it's not very complex and can be pretty dull. Later on in the game, things can change due to your actions, which makes the story stand out from the previous games. Overall, this entry is below average, and I'd have to rank it 1.5 Roy being in Smash before this game even came out. Isn't that a fun fact? 7th Fire Emblem is the first Fire Emblem game to release outside Japan because at this point Super Smash Bros. Melee was out. It's just called Fire Emblem in America, but in Japan it was released with a title that translates to the Sword of Flame or the Blazing Blade or something like that. Most people just call it Fire Emblem 7 though. Since this was the first Fire Emblem game in America, it's one that many people started with, and it's still a great starting point for any players today. The look of the game's pixel art is also very clean looking, and the battle animations are really nice, probably some of the best in the series. This entry doesn't require a fan translation either, so the dialogue actually feels natural and the writing is pretty fun. 7 actually has a lot of likable characters, and while none of them really have a very complex personality, it was definitely better than any other game so far besides Echoes. The story is sort of refreshing with it not being a straight tale of some prince having to retake the throne, though there are some familiar elements from other Fire Emblem titles. The story centers around Lyn, who's an assist trophy in Smash, and her getting a magical sword that shows her to wield it. And then she gets replaced with another anime sword boy. That's right! You thought this game was going to be different, but it's not! They have to have an anime sword boy with the sword put on the box art, not a dumb girl with a way more interesting character. Anyway, after that you have to stop this guy with the fucking name Nurgle from summoning an ancient dragon and killing everyone. The plot is a step in the right direction after so many of these games were pretty similar, but it was still lacking in many of the similar aspects, so I enjoyed playing it while I did, but it's probably not something I'll pick back up anytime soon. I give it 3 bad guys that are evil because, ooh, corrupted by dark energy out of 5. It's pretty above average, and the start is kinda slow as well. Fire Emblem Sacred Stones is the 8th Fire Emblem game, and I honestly don't have much to say about it. Fire Emblem 8 has stronger characters, but other than that, it's on par with Fire Emblem 7. If you want to start the Fire Emblem franchise with the title on the Game Boy Advance, which has been this one and the last 2, then either 7 or 8 would be a good option, with 8 possibly being better due to it being slightly easier. It's a good game, but I'd still give it a 3 out of 5. Oh, I haven't made a joke this segment yet. What if the title is like Sacred Balls or something? Because stones. Okay, we can move on now. Fire Emblem Path of Radiance is the one with Ike, and it came out for the GameCube in 2005, and it's pretty good. Ike is probably the best main character yet besides Echoes. I keep saying that for things, but I just like the game a lot, okay? And what really makes him stand out is that he's not royalty or prince or some character it's hard to feel attached to. Instead, he's a mercenary, but like the good mercenaries because he has to be the hero, with a band of other characters that are also pretty enjoyable. With each installment, the quality of life improves with the games, but this one kind of felt it the most yet. The 3D animations were all nice chains of pace, especially when considering this was the first 3D Fire Emblem chronologically, though I don't really have a preference between the 3D or pixel-based styles. Found this installment was forgiving in terms of difficulty. I had chosen the easiest setting though, so if you're looking for more of a challenge, you can always up it. In terms of story, Path of Radiance stays complex by being far more grounded than other games. I mentioned this before, but Ike pretty much just being some dude that can fight makes his story feel more realistic and personal. Ike doesn't have full-on armies just handed to him. He has to work for his following, right up to the level of some characters having the possibility of not even joining your team if you don't prove to them you're a good enough leader. I haven't talked about this much yet because I haven't been playing the games to the point where this feature really matters, but this Fire Emblem has a gameplay mechanic where you can support other units by fighting with them, which unlocks scenes where you learn more about the characters. Well, in one example, a character will straight up leave your army if you aren't high enough rank in their support, so yeah, your relationship with your crew actually matters. Villagers in Path of Radiance won't talk to you like they're king, like how everyone sucks up to you in prior games. Sure, they'll praise you for being a strong anime boy, but they'll also often talk to you like a real and normal person, speaking casually and not really caring who's invading their land because who's in charge doesn't much concern some random family working on a small farm. These people you talk to feel like real townsfolk, and something like Game of Thrones, where whenever a main character would talk to someone random, they'd have no idea what's happening in the world of politics beyond idle gossip. It's not like they have the internet and a million websites that write an article every time Donald Trump speaks. No, the people you talk to are often like the citizens of King's Landing. They'll go out into the streets to cheer for every new person that takes the throne. They have no idea what's going on. Unless of course you have the ability to turn into an animal, because this Fire Emblem is a racism. In this Fire Emblem there are 2 species, York and Laguz. Okay, those are some really dumb names, but Laguz are people with tails or wings and can shapeshift into animals, while the B ones are just normal fucking humans. The humans have been enslaving the furry people for years, and throughout the game, members of each species treat each other with complete and open hostility. A main factor of this game's plot is fixing the injustice of the Laguz while having to fight this war. In the game, both races in your army have to learn to fight together, and the characters grow to understand each other and become friends, with many of your human units having arcs centered around seeing the Laguz as actual people like themselves. Listen, none of this is groundbreaking commentary on racism, but it's something. The humans in the story have to take accountability for their actions. They can't just ignore the injustices they've caused. You find out the Laguz were used as a means to perpetrate the war, with the entire race being to blame for an assassination, which wasn't even true. Meanwhile, the humans' bloodshed was conveniently omitted from history to the Bjork writing it themselves. This draws parallels to real world with themes of imperialism and history being changed to make predominantly white societies look better. Thor Ragnarok did this too, I don't know why, but that's just the first piece of media that comes to mind. Anyway, moving past the themes of whitewashing and resistance movements, because all gamers know video games are apolitical unless they have girls kissing, the villain is also one of the best of Fire Emblem, with the Black Knight being both menacing and mysterious, and centers as a nice plot hook that keeps you questioning and out for revenge that feels more personal due to the connection Ike has to him. The Black Knight is actually so menacing he can't even be killed in the early levels, as a reminder that no matter how good you get, you still aren't good enough. In fact, you can beat the entire game without even killing him because he's just so hard to beat. That's also because the Black Knight isn't the main villain, who's some guy that wants to kill everyone in the world or something. Look, his name is Asnard, who cares? The biggest thing about Path of Radiance is the fleshed out world and characters, and it's one of the best Fire Emblem games at 3.5 very subtle racism allegories out of 5. Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn is the 10th Fire Emblem game and was on the Wii. It shares a lot in common with Path of Radiance due to being a continuation of the story, as you might glean from the title, and while it isn't necessarily required to play Path of Radiance first to understand what's going on, I found the difficulty in Radiant Dawn was much more harder and therefore wouldn't be a great pick if you're just starting out. So if you're interested in this one, you may as well just play Path first anyway. To start off, the characters in this one seemed flatter, and the story didn't pull me in as much as Path of Radiance. The game is grounded in the same way Path of Radiance was, but I just didn't feel a connection to the story in the same way. It was really hollow in a lot of ways. Also, they brought back the Black Knight, and it's seriously dumb. Like, they explain it as him letting Ike beat him, like it's really dumb and makes the character worse. Honestly, a lot about the story in this one felt lazy, but they also did a lot of pretty cool things, like having small details lead into a larger part of the plot, and map designs are also really fun. One of the most annoying things I found about the game, though, was one of the main characters, Micaiah, I think that's what it is. Fire Emblem Jesus over here is basically a god. Actually, she does end up becoming a god, but let's not get into that. She just keeps getting powers handed to her, like being able to heal people at will and seeing into the past, or future, or present, which whatever the writers needed her to know, she knows because of her magical insight. Her character makes the game lose a lot of the grounded realism it had, especially compared to Ike, who had to work for what he had. This didn't come up in Path of Radiance review segment, but that game had people known as the Branded that were a mix of both the human and animorph races and thus received discrimination from both sides. Path of Radiance handled this with grace and their side characters, but with Micaiah being a Branded in Radiant Dawn and her never receiving an ounce of ignorance other characters received in the last game, it just comes off as distasteful and against the message of the game. The story is still good along with the gameplay, but I thought this was a pretty mid Fire Emblem at 3 Wii remotes out of 5. Fire Emblem Awakening is the one with Chrom, Lucina, and Robin, and it came out in 2012 for 3DS. This one has the most characters in Smash, meaning it's the best Fire Emblem game. Alright, I'm kidding, but I'm going to put my hot take socks on and say that this Fire Emblem game is actually really good. Actually, it's one of the best Fire Emblem games. Now, if you don't know, a lot of Fire Emblem veterans don't like this one, whether it be because they want to act cool and pretend they like Thracia 776, or a more rational reason and they think it's okay but there's better Fire Emblems out there. However, before I knew what I wanted to do with this video, I'd started playing this one first. I played it for about a month, maybe getting halfway through the game. And maybe because this was my first Fire Emblem game, maybe because it's the one I played the most, but I really like this one. Prior to Awakening, Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem were the last two Fire Emblem games released. Those are two of the remakes we played earlier instead of the originals. While I thought these two games were fine, when they came out, Fire Emblem was in trouble. The series wasn't selling, and New Mystery didn't even get a translation, as I had mentioned earlier. Awakening was the Fire Emblem team's last shot at proving themselves, or the series was over. If it didn't sell well, Fire Emblem was done. Then, Fire Emblem Awakening became the first in the game's entire history to sell more than 1 million copies. In order to save the franchise, the team put their all into making this game, and it really feels like the game had heart because of it. Awakening acts as a sort of celebration of the franchise due to it possibly being the last one during development, and mixed with the new features, it really comes across as the best of both worlds. Many people consider this pandering to earlier fans of the series, but I thought it came across really well. Fire Emblem Awakening has fun and compelling writing, a story that keeps you invested, and tons of memorable characters. This is bolstered by the talent of Yusuke Kozaki, who in my opinion is the best character artist the series has ever had. Each character design is unique to the character and shows their personality, while many other games had characters looking pretty generic and bland, if I'm being totally honest. Awakening is a super charming game, especially when examining its characters, and it also does something cool with the fuck system the Genealogy of the Holy War had. And instead of the game spanning decades to show the lineage, the kids just show up in the present after two units hook up due to the game plot being about some time travel shit. The The time travel shit also makes the war and threat and whatnot in the story feel more real. There's definitely some things about the story and characters that's a bit one-dimensional, but I think the game makes it work. Anyway, if you aren't a boomer, Fire Emblem Awakening is a neat game, and honestly, it's the best one to play if you're a newcomer to the series. This is one a ton of people started with due to being what saved Fire Emblem, and kinda made it way more well known in the West. It's the easiest one to get into. While it does have a lot of callbacks to older games in the series, that'll only make you want to go back and play those games more. I feel Echoes might be better if I was able to play it longer, but right now I think it's about tied with Awakening for the best Fire Emblem game. And I know that's gonna get me hate, but in terms of my enjoyment, that's just how I feel. Also, Awakening would be a better pick over Echoes if you're looking for your first Fire Emblem game, especially with it feeling more modern due to Echoes still having problems that stem from being a remake of a pretty old game. All in all, I'm going to give Fire Emblem Awakening 4 out of 5 characters that look like they're children, but they're actually 1,000 years old. Like, seriously, this is a trope that Fire Emblem is kind of known for, as well as having child units being able to fuck adults. It's really weird, and especially with Naui, it's super over-sexualized, and I wish these games wouldn't do this. Hopefully this pandering stuff stops in the next sketch. Oh no, the next one's Fates. Shit. Fire Emblem Fates is the one with Corrin, and it's actually 3 games, I guess? Okay, wait, now I have to. Fire Emblem Birthright is one with Corrin, and is one of the 3 games that make up Fire Emblem Fates, with this one being the first one alphabetically, so that's what we're starting with. The idea of Fates being 3 games is similar to Pokemon having different versions, but also not, because they're 3 completely different stories stemming from an idea that developers had of having one choice in the game branched off into 3 completely different storylines. Fates is also considered the easiest of the 3, so if you were to start with Fates, you'd probably want to pick this one. Okay, so in Fates, your character is kidnapped by birth to live with the Conquest people. Let's just call them the black and purple cover art family. Well, in Birthright, after you find this out, you chose to go back with your real family, the white and red cover art people. Now, obviously, any sane person would choose the black and purple one because of the lady with big boobs, but for the sake of this video, we're going to go with Birthright first, and we'll get back to Conquest in a second. The main thing I noticed about Birthright is the art style is unique in that it's themed around classic Japanese samurai kind of shit, because of the white and red family being more like classic good guys. This also affects weapons and stuff the classes have, so it's not only an art direction, it also comes in the gameplay. Corrin is probably one of the worst main characters though, as they're self-insert but unrelatable in every level, especially due to them being royalty and not someone like Ike or a real self-insert like in Awakening. And when Corrin chooses a side after members of both sides being super nice to him, those people that earlier absolutely loved him just turn super petty and hate him. Like, it makes the characters unlikable when you know your family will just turn on you like that if they don't get their way. Anyway, if you like the Japanese themes, then Birthright could be for you, or if you're just looking for the version that's closest to Awakening. Fire Emblem Conquest is the one with Corrin, and it's about joining the black and purple box art kingdom that are clearly evil. This is the hardest of the 3, but I thought the story was better despite the obvious plot hole I mentioned. Struggling with choosing between the family that raised you and your real family is a really interesting thread to explore, and I think Conquest looks at it the best. Really, it's a dilemma where I can see both sides. You may want to choose the people you grew up around despite their flaws over people you have no personal connection with. Then again, those flaws are nuking an entire kingdom, so... Fire Emblem Revelations is one with Corrin in it, and it came out later as DLC for the option of being a bitch and choosing neither side, thus making neither of the other 2 games even matter because this ends up solving the problem in the first place and combining both storylines. You also need to buy one of the other ones first to even play it, so it's pretty scummy to be honest. This one's middle difficulty, but who cares? This one has a lot of filler, which is saying something considering the other 2 are primarily filler as well. It's meant to solve a lot of unanswered questions, but it'd also be cool if the 2 games you already bought finished the story, but whatever. Fire Emblem Fates isn't terrible, but the 3 games share a lot in common in terms of being kinda bad in parts. The story is pretty meh and does some weird things, and while I like a lot of the characters, at points they're written very unnaturally and do things that wouldn't make sense to who they are in the game. Some of them are also pretty forgettable beyond the great art designs that carried over from Awakening. If you know anything about Fate, it's probably that a lot of fans don't like it. I think that comes from a troubled production the game had where there were 2 factions on the dev team that wanted separate things out of the property, which is actually kind of fitting considering the game was split into multiple versions as well. Basically, one team wanted to make a good game, and the other team wanted to pander to fans by doing weird things like, this.
No matter what happens, dear love,
I will always be with you.
Pandering is what a lot of Fire Emblem veterans don't like about Awakening, so doubling down on this aspect was strange and was never going to work from the get-go. Also, I should clarify that Fire Emblem games do different types of pandering. One type of pandering is pandering to old games in the newer games, and the other type of pandering is the fucking sex stuff. It's, yeah. Like, seriously, they added an option where your character can fuck anyone you chose to, but why they chose this game to introduce this feature in is baffling, because this is the game where more than any other Fire Emblem game, you are literally related to the most people, whether it be by blood or thinking of them as your brothers and sisters. Like, that's incest, dog! Fire Emblem, why do you do that? The gameplay is good though, and the main problem with the game is definitely the story, with it not really doing anything for the most of the game, just dragging along. But there's also a really good game hidden somewhere within Fates, just very, very deep. There's elements of the story that could have been great with two opposing families you had to choose between. It just isn't handled in an interesting way, and should have been fleshed out way more with a longer development cycle of teams that maybe possibly weren't fighting about what they wanted the game to be. That might have helped too. I liked Conquest slightly better, but Fates is all pretty much the same, and really, you have to play it all to get the full experience, so I'd put Fire Emblem Fates at like 2 creepy skinship minigames. Like, what is this? So that's every mainline Fire Emblem game leading up to Fire Emblem 3 Houses. Here's my rough rankings of all the games in case you forgot, or if you just want to be reminded why you disliked the video already when I said the old Fire Emblem games were boring. Listen, none of the Fire Emblem games are bad by any means. They're all fairly good games, and I can also see why some of the older games have a die-hard fan base. This video is specifically coming from an outside perspective though, and is a guide from a new player of the series to other new players or people that want to get into the games. Fire Emblem is seen as a niche group of games despite them being under the banner of Nintendo, with people either not wanting to get into them because they don't know if they'd like the gameplay, they don't know where to start, they've never even heard of it, or they can't afford a game console. Okay, that one I won't be able to help you with, or I think you're on your own for that one, but Fire Emblem 3 Houses seems like a great starting point as well, but maybe you want to know if you'd be interested in other games from the series as well. Well, these are the other games, and I just gave my really shitty opinions on them after playing them for not nearly as long as I should have played 50-hour games for. In my opinion, Fire Emblem deserves as much love as many other Nintendo games get, and they're a great entry point into other games that might be seen as more unknown or indie, and other facets of niche genres and other mediums. You should explore more media you're unfamiliar with and learn about new things, like a game series with a long history, interesting characters, a focus on story, gameplay that offers a challenge, and that's run by creatives that care about the stories they're telling. At the end of the day, if one of the Fire Emblem games you saw in this video was interesting to you, just seek it out and play it. And honestly, just try any game you think you might like. Personally, I think Awakening would be the best option to go for, with maybe 3 Houses also being a good option, though that one is much more longer and slightly more complex, but I think any Fire Emblem game would be a good starting point as long as you find interest in it. And also, you should support me by liking this video and following me on social media, because, like Fire Emblem, not enough people give me the attention I deserve as a content creator with a spotty quality of some of my work. That's my self-promotion all YouTubers have to do to stay relevant, and thank you guys for watching my review, retrospective, guide, whatever this was, to Fire Emblem. Thanks. Okay. Bye.